scenario, the scenario that was earlier and what is required in the future, plus the different activities that have happened both with the government and the private sector in terms of institution building and in terms of work that's happened. I'll limit my presentation to all of you here to the activities to which I am familiar with in the area in which we are in Department of Telecommunication and the Ministry of Communications are working. Telecom is a critical infrastructure. It carries its own critical information infrastructure, and as a critical infrastructure, it carries the other critical infrastructure on it. The critical information infrastructure for the power sector, the banking, transportation. So all of these are carried on that, and that way it becomes critical or the critical infrastructure. The major thrust in this area over the years has been in providing connectivity, increasing the reach and penetration of telecom services across the country. You will find in the last decade, the decade and a half, there's been a remarkable improvement in the reach of telecom services. And we as a country are proud of the fact that we have achieved, as together as a country have achieved in achieving this. Security as such, was not treated as a separate entity within the whole set of operations. Though using telecom for the security of the nation in terms of lawful interception has been there right from beginning, since in 1880s. But looking at the security of networks was mostly limited to, because the networks are isolated, so that was not really a big concern at that time. Mostly of protecting the premises, the physical security of the premises where the telecom installations were hosted. So we had, those as protected places where we had restricted access to people from outside. I'll tell you that the security function of which I'm looking after in the Department of Telecommunication is a quite recent phenomenon. It has come about around 6 or 7 years back, and prior to that, we didn't have a separate security function as such. So, you would say that, you would understand, that the realization that a separate security function is required has come about because of all the evolution that has happened in terms of the architecture of the network and the technologies that are being deployed in the network, which have made them more vulnerable to attacks from outside without gaining physical access to the networks. And the scale and scope of the effect that such attacks would have in affecting the networks and the infrastructure of the networks. So once this whole thought process of securing the networks in terms had come about, it has been a learning experience for the organization. And through this learning experience, you would find that there was a lot of cooperation and coordination that happened with the industry in terms of evolving what is required to be done to make the network secure, the information of the network secure, the transactions that happen on the network secure, and the end users who are using all these networks for making those transactions, be able to do secure transactions for themselves. It was a good learning experience. There were many pitfalls that happened along the way. There were lots of brickbats that were received because of certain actions that were taken. But over this, when you went through this whole exercise, we've had some guidelines being given. And telecom in the country is a licensed activity. The Indian Telegraph Act provides that under the Section 4 of the Indian Telegraph Act. Provision of telecommunication services is the exclusive privilege of the union government. But this exclusive privilege could be licensed to operators from the private sector or any other sector. So we've had licensed service providers providing telecommunication services. And in the license conditions, we have had over a period of time, different security conditions that were incorporated in terms of, asking the vendors to share source code also, which became a very highly controversial requirement. But after all these deliberations, in the year 2011, we came up with one comprehensive amendment to the existing license conditions for the provision of telecom services. And in coming to this stage, there's a lot of input that came from the academia, there's a lot of input that came from the industry and from within the government. And within the government, both from the licensor, that is the Department of Telecommunication, and from the other agencies which are involved for national security, like the Ministry of Home Affairs and the law enforcement agencies. I'll, in this talk, I'll give you a brief outline about, what are these things and how, we're trying to address the requirements of national security and the security of the users of these networks through these amendments that had happened. See, one of the first things that has been prescribed for all of the network operators is that each of them should have a security policy of their own. Of course, before that, I would like to say that it was mandated that the security of the networks is their responsibility. They have to take care of the networks. Having said that, we come up with any other prescriptions that are there. One of them is that they should have a security policy of their own. And there were some baseline requirements of the security policy, because each of them was asked to come up with a security policy. You could have, multiple flavors of the security policy. So some of the basic requirements of the security policy were also prescribed in the license amendment, in terms of having, their own risk analysis mechanism for vulnerability analysis and penetration testing, mechanisms for risk, for security testing and others. So the baseline things like were prescribed in that. The second prescription was that within they're supposed to have a security audit, which they could do either through a outsourced accredited agency or within an independent unit within their own organization. An annual security audit, and the reports of the security audit are to be shared with the licensor. Another requirement was that each of them should security test all network elements before they're inducted into the telecom networks. The other requirement was that they should have a security operational manual, that there should be a mechanism for capturing the logs to be maintained for a period of 1 year. There should be a mechanism for capturing incidents, security incidents, and reporting the incidents to the licensor and to the certain. It is also mandated that persons occupying critical infrastructure in terms of core architecture like the MSCs, the HLR, the core infrastructure should be trained Indian nationals. And they were, asked to follow all of these. And to ensure that all of these requirements are followed, there were also penal conditions that were imposed. If there is a security incident, the per breach penalty was fixed at ₹50 crores. But there was a condition that whether the breach was intentional, whether due diligence was exercised in putting measures in place, would be assessed by a committee of experts who would determine the liability and the quantum of penalty that was to be imposed. Now, these conditions that came out in 2011 were, subsequently in all the universal licenses that had come about, it was made part of the future licenses that also came about. Having said that, there are challenges in this. Okay, we have got the framework put in place, but there are challenges in this. What are the challenges we have? One of is that, we are mandated that we should have the security tested network elements to be inducted into the network. And we also had a condition that such testing and certification should happen from within the country from a cutoff date. In this, we have the challenge of having adequate testing infrastructure within the country for enforcing this. So as of now, the network operators get their network elements tested from anywhere in the world, from certified labs. But we are in the process, in collaboration with IISc Bangalore, for establishing the requisite requirements, because one thing about security testing of network elements is we have got the CC, common criteria testing for IT elements. But for the pure telecom network elements, the international bodies have mostly concentrated on the operational standards. But the security requirements is something that has come up as recently as 2014, when the CCAM group was created. And we are proud of the fact that because of these security awareness that has come about in telecom sector, because of the license conditions they have kept, the CCAM group has come about, and they're actively working on the security requirements of telecom network elements. They have come up with the first set of standards for a network element called the MME, and that has been floated and is expected, a work in progress, will cover all the other network elements shortly. And based on the standards, we could have security testing that happens. When we're looking at the testing requirements for network elements, one of the things is we test as per standards. The other is we do other tests that are required as per national security requirements. So the testing infrastructure we are creating is looking at covering the testing requirement as per the standards that are published globally. And the other one we are looking at is specific requirements that come about specific to network elements based on our own study of the security profile of that and the vulnerability associated with that, the test that we would ourselves develop, and then test it as per the requirement. Now that's a work in progress. It's a very complicated, an involved process that we have been going through. We have been having issues with capacity development in terms of the people available with the requisite skills and knowledge in that area. We have been successful to a certain extent in studying. Of course, good understanding of the common criteria has been developed in the security test lab that we have got, and with the telecom personnel who have got a lot of operational experience of around 15 years and or 10 to 15 years, we've also been able to understand deeply the telecom protocols of especially the 3GPP standards, the 3GPP2 standards, and the IETF standards, and developed a good understand, and we have developed test suits for around 8 network elements covering different classes of telecom network elements. We have taken one network element from each class, and for each of that we have developed test suits. And during this whole process of developing the test suits, we have come to understand that 80% of the requirement of the test suits is common across all network elements. We had actually initially done with different test suits, but then after that realization has come, we have gone through that, we find that 80% of the test suits requirements are common across all the network elements. So we are actually coming in a framework in which we will have one baseline test suite that is common to all telecom network elements. Then over on that, an overlay would be there, network element specific test suits which would be there. Plus then we have a test requirement document and a test process document. So this is the way we are structuring the whole testing process for the network elements. Okay. So this is regarding the this thing. But we're looking at future challenges that are coming up in terms of the machine to machine, because there will be a tremendous explosion in the the mobile network infrastructure that will be required for machine to machine. And the problem with machine to machine is that bulk of the devices are low value devices produced in bulk, and many of them do not have much of the security features. It's a challenge, and it's a burgeoning field. And you would understand that with the recent attack on the DYN DNS service provider in the US, where we had a DDoS attack, which take place with a lot of this M2M devices, especially the CCTV cameras and all, low value, large volume devices spread across the world, which were used for this particular DDoS attack. We find that's a very big challenge that is there, that's required to be addressed. And as a department, that is in this area, we look forward to all of these security challenges that come up. We have to work with the industry, we have to work with academia exactly to identify the problem statements, and then find solutions to these problems. Not just an academic exercise where some research happens, but it's subsequently delivered as a product that can be actually used to solve these problems that we have got. So one of them is this problem of the M2M that is coming up and that has to be actively attacked. The other is with the financial inclusion and all these services, financial services and other services migrating to the mobile platform, securing the mobile device. Whether we have any standards, now we are picking up mobile devices off the shelf and then using them for highly sensitive transactions. And are we assured, are we clear that that device is secure? We have a lot of apps that we keep on downloading. How do you have trusted apps, and how do you secure device from these apps is another area that requires attention.
Excuse me, sir. Only 3 more minutes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for the information. Okay, then we have these issues of identity, because identity is something that is being collected by a lot of private entities also. So we have issues of identity theft that have to be addressed, and the personal identifiable information. And we have problems with content. Social media is one thing they talked about. Pornography content, protection of child online, authenticity of the information that is online. So these are areas that we from the department will look forward to working closely with industry and academia to address these issues. Then one of the things that was mentioned in the canvas that was shown was regarding lawful interception. I'll just briefly tell you that as an organization we also provide, one is security per se of the infrastructure, security for information, but the cyber world can also be used for providing security for the nation, and the interception capabilities for the transactions that happen on the cyber world is something as a nation that we are trying to enhance capabilities. Professor Balakrishnan talked about the central monitoring system. We have established the central monitoring system across the country for lawful interception. The system is working within the existing legal framework of the Indian Telegraph Act and the IT Act 2008. And it automates a process that already exists for lawful interception. It's not that lawful interception is something new. Lawful interception is covered by the Indian Telegraph Act Section 5.2, where the law enforcement agencies, through an appropriate mechanism, get authorization for interception and then intercept content for various national security purposes. The CMS system is going to automate the whole process and make it much easier, more flexible for the law enforcement agencies to get the desired information through lawful interception and perform their tasks. This infrastructure has been put in place across the country and is currently operational. And this will provide interception facilities both for the mobile networks and for the internet. So these are some of the things that are happening, and I'm happy to share these things with you.